Good afternoon. Sorry that you may have missed this class. This recording is video lesson is for October 12th and 13th. And I will just tell you that the main thing we did in today is again, and it will sound like it's a very lengthy time just to review for a test, but we did get thrown off several weeks ago with the hurricane that came through, and it means we've had to crunch some lessons together. And I know we just had a, a quick, hopefully very successful quiz when we left at the end of last week. But we're doing this one today so that we can be back on track, and hopefully things will go a little smoother and not be so uh, compact. So that's the reason why today's lesson is essentially another review of chapter 20, sections 1 and 2. And depending on if you're gold or blue, after this review, which is lengthy, it took quite a bit of time during class. We then had the quiz. So that follows. So listen, we're providing a quiz. There's no secrets. There's nothing hidden about the test. It is exactly on what we're about to go over in the review that you're going to be watching and listening to. Um, so it is a 20 question. It's called 20 questions, but really when you open it up and look at it, the first, I believe it's, I could be a little bit off here, but I believe it's 11 multiple choice or maybe a couple of true or false questions. And then you see a question 12 that when you click on it, it's some matching questions that are worth, I believe, 32 points. So it looks like it's only 13 questions, but it's really a number, I think, of 8 matching that are in the multiple choice. I mean, the matching question number 12. And then number 13 is writing about history. And there's a question on there where I'm expecting you to follow the format of the 5 sentence paragraph that has um, a topic sentence to start off with, then at least 3 sentences for body details, and then a concluding sentence. If you're still not quite sure how that all works, if you need to review it, go to the red folder that's got additional classroom information in it and look for the document that has what I'm talking about how to write a 5 sentence paragraph to a response in history. Um, Quick reminder, I continue to have every once in a while somebody asks me a question, why the writing? Because in an advanced class, when you're advanced students, you're expected to write and write at a higher level, and social studies partners with English to require writing happening in the class that meets the expectations of the language teacher, Miss Pate. So that's why, and that'll happen in 7th and 8th grade as well. Um, so before we do anything else, let me just remind you of what's going on here today. There's a review, which we're going to go over, and then you take your quiz on sections 1 and 2 of chapter 20. All right. There may have been 1 or 2 classes that were able to squeeze in a discussion question. I do believe they did because I wanted practice done. And if you go into some classes, it may be a different day, but there was a discussion question that also led off the class in it was either gold or blue, where you pretend that you are a new immigrant with a rare time off on a Saturday. Because remember, they worked 6 day weeks back then, only had Sundays off. So pretend that this is a rare day and pretend that you happen to have money that you're not used to having money. A little bit, not lots, but you don't need a lot back then because things were it was a different time. and 5 cents could buy you a hot dog. 5 cents, literally. Um, so you are an immigrant with time off on a Saturday, and what do you do? And the expectation being write a nice paragraph about that. We do want some writing to happen first. And we spent probably about, I'm going to guess about 15 or 20 minutes on that to kick it off before we went to the review and then the quiz. So I have in my hand the same review. It's not the exact questions and it's not the same order as the quiz. But if you really pay attention to this, you can listen to this several times and then take the test. I'm expecting you'll do great on the test. All right. So the first thing I have to ask you, and it's not exactly one of the multiple choice type questions, but if I was to ask you, name at least three, this could be maybe a writing prompt, is what I'm saying. If you were to give me three solutions that cities implemented to solve their problems. I remember they had three problems really that we've talked about. One is with all these people moving in, where are they going to live and where are they going to work? That was one problem. The other one was there's so much stuff on the street, so many people on the street, it's so congested. What are we going to do to get the streets cleared? That's problem number two. And then problem number three has to do with all these people, and they need to have something to do to enjoy themselves in what little free time they have. That's problem number three. So if I was to say, write about or give me some of the solutions that were implemented, you'd come up with, there's possible 8 that we discussed. Number one, skyscrapers, because that solved the problem of the where are they going to work and live, right? Skyscrapers. So that's one possible solution you could talk about. The other one of clearing the streets, there's 3 more solutions you could talk about there that have to do with mass transit. We discussed in detail trolleys, subways, and elevated trains. So those 3 plus skyscrapers, that's 4 solutions that were in that chapter. The remaining 4 solutions you could write or talk about have to do with mass culture. And there we talked about department stores, Central Park, and other city parks like that, amusement parks, which were created at that time, like Coney Island. And we talked about Pulitzer adding color comics to newspapers, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but it was a big deal back then when you don't have things like movies, TV, radio, nothing like that. So just having the ability to have a printed paper in your hand that's color and it's got funny things in there to read and discuss with people, it was a big deal. So those are your 8 solutions that if you get a question about that, that's what I'm expecting your answers to come from those choices, not anywhere else. So now let's talk about some of the other questions. And since you have the ability to pause this at any time, I won't take nearly the time or the discussion that went into it in the classroom. Here we go. Immigrants from Great Britain and Scandinavia and Germany, they had been coming into this country for a long time before this time period that we're studying. What were those immigrants called? And the answer is old immigrants. Old immigrants. Next, um, there were some Americans. Most Americans were for the new immigrants, especially factory owners, people like that. They understood that these were people that needed jobs, and America had jobs for them. But there were others that were against them. They were afraid that they were going to take their jobs or they were going to change America somehow, and they were against them. What were these people called? And they call themselves this too. The answer is nativist. Nativist. Remember, we talked that was ironic because they're not natives unless they're full blown 100% Native Americans. They're the product of immigrants too, but they were called nativists despite the irony. All right, so the next question. There were railroads that came from the west into Chicago, and they were loaded with certain products. And then those railroad tracks went on to the east. So thousands of Chicago residents found work in two particular industries because of what was coming in on the trains from the west and then being processed somehow and moving on to the east. So what two are we talking about here? If I say one is meat packing, what's the other one? They go hand in hand. So the answer is slaughterhouses and meatpacking plants. All right. Slaughterhouses, meatpacking plants. The area that these immigrants came to America, uh, the area of the ship in which they came to America, what's that called? It's below the ship's deck, and that area is called steerage. Steerage. There were organizations that offered immigrant families help in case maybe they had sickness in their family or death, or they just simply could not find where those jobs were. There were certain organizations that helped these immigrants out. What do we call those organizations that helped people? And the answer is benevolent societies. Benevolent societies. Benefit, beneficial, benevolent. Same root word for all three words. All right. The next term. This is the act or the law. Those are synonyms we've learned already, right? This is the law that banned Chinese people from immigrating to the U.S. for 10 years. 10 years. These people were not allowed because of this law. What's the name of the law? The Chinese Exclusion Act. Chinese Exclusion Act. First time any particular people were banned from entering our country. Elevated trains. What's that an example of? Elevated trains. They look just like trains, but they're built up above the street. We saw the picture there going on across, and so they're not blocking traffic at all. They're examples of mass transit. A lot of people can be up there on that train riding by, and it's going to clear up the street, right? The train track is above the street, so now that's all those people riding that train are no longer down below walking on the street. Mass transit. Our next question or topic has to do with mass transit too. It's another type, and it's what we call those underground railroads. They're not elevated, they're now taking advantage of space in tunnels beneath the cities. What are those underground railroads called? And hopefully that's an easy one for you. Subways. Subways. A gentleman by the name of Frederick Olmsted. He created and designed something in New York City that became very famous, and it became the model for a lot of cities. What is that he created? And the answer is Central Park. Central Park, 843 acres with everything from a zoo to 37 or 38 playgrounds, baseball fields, a castle in the middle. He designed all this so that when you're in different parts of it, you would have a different feel and different activities that depending on what you're interested in or the age of the children or family members. Had everything, walking in a forest even. Frederick Olmsted. Next one. What percent of immigrants, once they came into Ellis Island, what percent were successful in getting through there in a couple of days and actually catching the ferry that took them to the main part of New York City? What percentage were successful? Very high percent. 98%. 98%. Wow. Only 2% were denied um, becoming U.S. citizens. What are giant retail shops called? Giant retail shops. We had we laughed a little bit in one of my classes um, when a couple people shouted out they were excited they knew the answer and they yelled out malls and factory outlet stores. And I hate to tell you, but both of those are wrong. Hopefully, it's not a difficult question. But giant retail shops are called department stores. Department stores. Okay. Number 13. These are workplaces with long hours and unhealthy working conditions. And we know from previous weeks that could just about be any industry in America at that time, right? They work Monday through Saturday, uh, usually around 11 hours a day, 6 days a week, and we're usually dirty. But this word usually is talking about workplaces that make clothing. Very often they had to do with clothing. What's the nickname for these shops? Sweatshops. That should be an easy one to remember because you're working so hard. You're just sweating inside this workshop, right? Sweatshops. Uh, Pay attention to this one because I've already started grading and seeing what the answers were on this one, so you can benefit from others. This is one that was by far the most missed question on the tests that I've seen so far. Immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe, what were they called? Now, we'd already had a topic where we were talking about the ones from Germany and Ireland and England, and those countries aren't in Southern or Eastern Europe. Those countries are in Northern Europe. What are these called from Southern and Eastern Europe? The answer is new immigrants. These are new countries for people to come from that are immigrating to the United States. All right, architects such as Louis Sullivan, excuse me, he designed multi-story buildings known as what? The answer is skyscrapers. Skyscrapers, of course. Um, and I did have somebody, I don't know if they weren't quite thinking uh, about it just logically, but they said, why are they called skyscrapers? And it's because they're so tall, they're scraping the sky. Okay. Now, the next one is a little bit, it's hard to know what I'm getting at, but it's a multiple choice type question. But it says, what major change to buildings did steel bring to American architecture? And it's really the same thing as the skyscraper almost. Um, beforehand, before steel was used to build the structure of buildings, they were building out of stone. And after you got to a certain level of floors, usually after 4 or 5, people didn't go any higher because that stuff is heavy and it's going to come crashing down on itself. It may be great for support, but not over a certain height. So steel allowed multi-story buildings. And the reason I'm saying just not just skyscrapers is because with steel, instead of a 4 or 5 story, you may build an 8 or 9 story. That's not a skyscraper, but it's still allowing you to go much higher than what was in place beforehand. The next question has to do with, and again, these aren't in order, they're just on my paper in this order. Um, what do you call public transportation that's designed to move a lot of people? And the answer is mass transit. Mass transit. Mass, a lot. Transit, transportation. Moving a lot of people at the same time. Who added color comics to his newspaper? Very famous gentleman. And I believe I mentioned this in the last recorded lesson. He He's so famous in writing and in journalism that the awards for the best novel, best nonfiction book, a number of awards in writing each year. To the most prestigious, the very highest honor you can get in writing is the Pulitzer Prize, named after Joseph Pulitzer. So he owned all these newspapers, and the main one that's so famous is in New York City. He added color comics. All right. Many middle class Americans who could afford it, they moved to these neighborhoods, these residential. Residential means this is where you live. It's not for other areas, where you live. They moved to these areas outside of the downtown areas. What are these residential neighborhoods called? And they are called suburbs. Suburbs. And we have those in Sims, don't we? Number 22, the busiest immigrant processing center on the East Coast. What's the name of the busiest one on the East Coast? We did have confusion over the last couple of days about East Coast versus West. East Coast versus West Coast. What is the East Coast? The East Coast is there, and it's Boston, New York. That's the east side of the country, right? So if you can get that straight, East Coast, then you should know that the busiest one is right there in New York City, and it's the one we've talked so much about, Ellis Island, where today um, it's I've seen the statistics where they believe that 40% of all Americans, 40% of all Americans today, their ancestors came to America, first step foot in Ellis Island. So it's important that we know that because so many of us, we could go back and trace our family history. We're tracing it back to that little island there in New York City, Ellis Island on the East Coast. Okay. Now, if I say what's the busiest one on the West Coast, that's California and that area of the country on that side, right? So, what's the busiest processing center on that coast? It's also an island, isn't it? Off of San Francisco, Angel Island. Angel Island. And if I then ask, well, which one did the Chinese immigrants come through? Doesn't it make sense that if China is over here and here's the Pacific Ocean, that they come in to Angel Island in California, right? That's the right answer. They're not going to go all the way around the world to come over to the other side of the continent. So they car across the Pacific and come in at Angel Island in San Francisco. All right, don't confuse those. All right, the next question again, it's a multiple choice type test. But if I ask, where did new immigrants choose to first live? Usually, not all the time, but so many of them chose to live where? And what I'm looking for is what type of people maybe would they be choosing to live with? So if they were Jewish, were they wanting to live in Italian neighborhoods or Russian neighborhoods or other Jewish neighborhoods? And that would be the answer. They're no matter what country they're coming from, they're wanting to normally live with folks that came from that same country. And a big reason is because they can't speak English. So if you're Italian and you get off the boat and now you go into an Italian neighborhood, well, these people may know English, but they also know Italian, and you can speak with them, and they can speak with you, right? And you can share culture. And the churches in that neighborhood, they have services in your language, or the stores. If again, I'm using the example of Italians. If you're wanting to buy pasta and tomato and garlic stuff that they cook with, the little stores and little grocery stores are going to have Italian type ingredients, right? So it was very important for them to feel like they're connected in some way while they're learning languages and learning new cultures. Uh, okay, so that's the answer there. Um, I gave the answer away to this next one already. What connects East and West Coast and run through Chicago? Railroads, right? Railroads connect both coasts and they go through Chicago where things can, with so many industries, if they need to be processed there, they can be, like the cattle and hogs that we talked about, but different other industries, they are coming through there. And maybe they don't need the industries there. Maybe they're coming from the East Coast or West Coast, and now they're going to go to the South. So the railroads are connecting all parts of this country through Chicago so often. What do we call the places where the new immigrants lived? What do we call those buildings? Okay, and the answer there is tenements. They lived in tenement housing that were poorly built and overcrowded, right? All right. Trolleys are an example of what? Mass transit. Okay. And if I was to ask a question like um, Central Park, Color Comics, department stores, amusement parks, what are they examples of? Not mass transit, right? Mass culture. The final topic to review is has to do with these nativists, the ones that didn't want these new immigrants coming into the country. And these are, I'm going to ask it as a couple of true or false questions. I'm going to say that they were able to stop Chinese people from coming into the country. Is that true? Nativists were able to stop Chinese people from entering the country. And the answer is true. For a while there, through the Chinese Exclusion Act, they got them banned for 10 years. It's quite a long time to ban a certain group from coming into the United States. One last question about the nativist. True or false again? I'm going to say that they were successful in stopping immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe from coming into the country. What do you think? Is that true or false? They were successful in banning Southern and Eastern European immigrants. The answer is false. They were not successful. They wanted it, but remember, those are the ones that are coming into Ellis Island. And a huge, not remember, 98% were allowed into our country, and there was never a ban of any specific people. And when you look at the records, the 2% that didn't get in, it wasn't because of the nativists, just because maybe they were unhealthy and had diseases, or they were worried that they could be pose a risk to the other people who were already here. So they were not successful at all. So that is everything that we reviewed. And if you know those topics, you know the answers there, um, and you do the real key here is after you know those topics, if you can write about those in a paragraph worth 13 points that meets all the requirements that are established in how to write a 5 sentence paragraph. Again, that is in the folder at the top of the red folder. Excuse me, I had an interruption there. It's how to write that is included in the red folder there at the top. Look at that carefully. You will do well on today's test or the day that you're able to take it. So good luck, and I'll see you the next recorded lesson. Take care, everybody.